pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, welcome to Soccer Today for the last day of February. Spring is almost here, just hold on tight, just a few more weeks, and we're going to be in spring. But there's one thing that won't be here in 2018, and that's the NASL. Yesterday, after months of tractations, the NASL canceled the 2018 season outright. And to talk about this situation, we have a friend of the show, Jeff Rueter, on the line. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning. That's probably the most optimistic way to look at spring while also looking at the downfall of the league, so I applaud you for that introduction.
Thank you.
Exactly, Jeff. Yeah, look, optimistic is, I don't know if there's any possible way to be optimistic about the future of the NASL. Canceling it outright for 2018 is a kind way to put it. Folding it would be the more cruel way to put it. So does it fall somewhere in between that, or is it really time to move on?
It's tough, Duane. I mean, you look at it and there's a couple of different breaking points, a couple of different events I think that have happened over the last, I would say 2.5 years at this point, that have really made it tough for me to see the NASL coming back with any sort of vitality. I think that you're looking at the exit of the San Antonio Scorpions back in 2015, coinciding with the Atlanta Silverbacks. When David Downs took over as the commissioner of the NASL in its early days, there were really two different types of plans in mind, but one absolutely was more prevalent. Yes, there was always a desire to bring back the Cosmos, because that, frankly, you can't call a league the NASL without having the New York Cosmos in it. That's just, it's not the NASL at that point, right? Because that is exactly what the league was known for in the 70s. That's the most iconic brand possibly still in U.S. soccer. And so you need to have that team in there. But along with that, they found a lot of these really thriving markets, TV markets and high population centers that crave soccer. And they put teams in these markets. You look at San Antonio and Atlanta, but you also had the Triangle in North Carolina. Eventually you had Indianapolis. You had the Twin Cities in Minnesota. You had a few of these other markets that you're looking at, and it just makes perfect sense on paper. And then you bring in Edmonton and Ottawa as well, who are very much filling a same role within the Canadian landscape that weren't getting MLS looks. And so you bring these markets in, they're able to become very relevant within their respective regions, which makes it a lot easier to build up the national interest. And I think that it was trending towards the right path. Now, San Antonio gets bought by the Spurs, not Tottenham, the Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich version. And they pull them, they rebrand them as San Antonio FC, and they put them in the USL. Atlanta Silverbacks aren't able to stay in the NASL, they go to the NPSL. Then you have what happened with Fort Lauderdale, where they weren't paying their players on time. They brought in too many players who just couldn't be paid, and they didn't have the money that they said they had. Checks were bouncing, team folds in 2016. The absolute debacle in Oklahoma City with Rayo Vallecano's feeder team.
I forgot about that. Oh,
never forget about that. Never forget about that. I don't think I will ever get to read a report and reference a minority owner of a team taking 60% of a team's field playing surface ever again. And I think what makes this, you know, and it's very laughable, first off, if you just look at it on paper, because Vallecano ended up getting relegated that year. Because even if they were only focusing 5% of their operation in Spain, they were a team that desperately needed 100% attention to stay up in La Liga. And they ended up folding OKC, and they ended up getting relegated. Absolute disaster. And now I think last year they were very close to falling to the third tier of Spanish football. So that's not ideal either. But really, I think that this winter, you ran into a lot of owners that were bullish without really having any reason to be, in particular in markets like New York and Miami. You had a a commissioner's role that hadn't been filled at a permanent basis for over 12 months now. And there's only so long you can really keep an interim commissioner in before you just need someone who's able to grab the reins and say, this is how we're going to run this operation. So there wasn't a clear driving voice from a neutral perspective. It was all club by club. And then you had the FATs just putting up the white flag and saying, okay, we're going to see what happens with the CPL and taking FC Edmonton out of the league. And suddenly you only had 4 teams left, realistically, especially when North Carolina and Indy jumped the divide and went over to the USL. So obviously there are a lot of people who are affected by this. It's really easy to look at the NASL, look at moments like OKC, look at things like not paying players on time, and look at it as an absolute farce. And in a lot of ways, yes, it was. But there are a lot of high-level, maybe not in that top 20 on an MLS team type of players from the USA and Canada who are able to continue playing with fairly lucrative deals, might I add, in soccer. And now suddenly most of these veterans who are 25 and above, 26 and above, are going to find it really damn hard to find a job in MLS or in the USL. And now the US player is probably going to have a tough time when CPL launches as well. So there are a lot of people who are affected. That doesn't even talk about club staff. So it's a trying time right now. It certainly is.
Fair enough. People, they think of, the OKC, and they think of, some of the crazier aspects, the lawsuits and things like that when they think of the NASL. But I go back to the start of this league, and you look at the teams that were in back then, and sort of you had clubs that sort of indicated, at least on, out loud, that they wanted to approach soccer in a different kind of way than MLS was. And you look at what happened with a lot of those clubs. Montreal was in that league, Vancouver was in that league, Minnesota was in that league. They're all in MLS now. Mm-hmm. So at some point, were these owners lying back then, or at some point did they just see the light and then it sort of left the more radical owners behind on their own devices, and we saw what happened?
I think that's a good question. That's a good way to put it too. I think that if you look at it, there was a major changeover in philosophy when Bill Peterson took over as the commissioner, because David Downs had his vision of, we can create an open market league that's relevant in the local communities and then therefore becomes relevant in the wider scheme of North American soccer. And when Peterson came in, he wanted to overthrow MLS, right? That was his big thing. He had come from a smaller American Football League, not the NFL, but he'd had those kind of brash visions of, I suppose, what the XFL tried to do in 2001 is going to try to do again next year, of seeing a niche and trying to take it. They saw MLS as floundering 5-6 years ago, which it still was, and wanted to capitalize. So then you have those owners with, let's say, unrealistic expectations of what they can do with a football club. And they're looking at it, and suddenly Bill Peterson is saying, yeah, try it. Let's absolutely try it. Go ahead and you can buy, Rayo Vallecano. Let's put a team in Oklahoma City, which already has a USL side in such a small market, and we'll put it in a worse stadium than the USL side is in. Great, sure, why not? We'll take your money. Let's do it. You look at San Francisco. Okay, you don't think that you're going to have attendance. There's never been strong attendance numbers in the USL in San Francisco. Okay, whatever. We're going to give it a try. Let's see how it goes. You look at the Cosmos takeover took some time. Fort Lauderdale was almost purchased by a PSG group that would have paid even less attention than the Vallecano group probably had. You look at domestic owners, even like Bill Edwards. You look at Mark Frisch, who took over Jacksonville for a period of time, but then realized you can't make a stupid amount of money off of a team, and then lost interest, and that Jacksonville almost folded before last season. Carmelo Anthony bought a team in Puerto Rico, and much like the actual island of Puerto Rico has been pretty much forgotten by the United States, likewise Puerto Rico FC has been. And so you look at it, and it's just he was a yes man, right? And ultimately decisions aren't made by Bill Peterson. They're made by the owners at large. But if you have a strong enough voice in that commissioner role, owners are aren't afraid to let their freak flags fly anymore. And they're willing to just try stuff, see what happens, fail miserably, and the collateral damage becomes these teams like the Jacksonville Armada, like Puerto Rico FC, and even to an extent like FC Edmonton. who just aren't able to keep up at that level and ultimately get dwarfed and lumped in with these teams that are doing just poor business.
One of the collateral damage in my mind, Jeff, as well, is some of players. I'm going to use a player that you know very well as an example, and it was his thought process on social media the last few days that helped me figure my thought process. And Jeff Brodsky, former player of Montreal Impact back in 2012, 2013, Minnesota United a few times in the NASL as well, and would tryouts with the MLS club. Jabrowski mentioned that the NASL over the last 3-4 years, because of its lack of consistency of quality in infrastructures and how clubs were run in levels across the league, it kind of skewed the perception of players and scouts, people in Major League Soccer and other leagues in the world when they're trying to assess the talent or assess a player as an asset to bring him over to MLS or to your USL team. It's hard to quantify that player. It's hard to actually see that player outside of the goggles of the NASL and everything that surrounds that branding. And in my mind, there's a lot of players like the Jabrowski of this world that are collateral damage and will have a lot of difficulty figuring out how to play again. A lot of those players have retired already. And I'm wondering, in your mind, Jeff, how valuable is this? Is the opinions of other soccer leagues towards those players? Some of them players were really good, and NASL teams were a lot of times often better than USL teams, but because of everything else surrounding it, it's hard to take one of those players and bring him to a higher level without having the perception of the NASL player.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount of smugness, Kevin, if you're looking at MLS general managers, tech directors, sporting directors, whichever title they want to put on their desk. When it comes to the NASL player, I think this shift might have reached its fever pitch when the Cosmos doubled down on Marcus Senna and brought in Raul, because Major League Soccer had been facing an insecurity that I think it may have finally shaken this season of being a retirement league. This might be the year. And so you're looking at the Cosmos bringing in 2 35-year-old Spaniards with World Cup glory. That's the exact type of player that 2-3 years earlier the Red Bulls would have loved to sign pre-Ollie Curtis, or that the Galaxy would have signed and tried to convince to not be a designated player. You know, things like that. And now suddenly the Cosmos are. So immediately there's this, I think, some level of insecurity and saying, okay, perfect, fine, we have our scapegoat now. We're not going to sign any player who drops down to the NASL unless that our club is moving up and we need to fill our roster like you saw in Minnesota and Montreal. But we're not going to sign these players because they're playing against retirement players. Giorgio Samaras didn't help that perception. Derek Boateng didn't help that perception. Nico Cranchar, Gerardo, who was it? Indy signed a former Mexican international as well. There were a lot of these players. Joe Cole.
Yeah, Joe Cole.
Gerardo Toledo. A lot of these players who would come in, and it was the exact same thing that MLS was trying to shake itself off of. The hard part is on the other side of that coin, the USL signed on with Major League Soccer as an affiliation league, or the clubs would have the ability to become affiliates. And so then the USL is rebranded as the Shiny Prospect Development League. You find a striker like Sean Coley, who wasn't able to make it in Major League Soccer, couldn't latch on with Seattle, couldn't latch on with New England, drops down to FC Cincinnati, wins the Golden Boot, immediately gets signed by NYCFC. Meanwhile, you have Christian Ramirez scoring 51 goals across 3 seasons, and only once did an MLS team come sniffing. It was Sporting Kansas City. I don't think that I've actually ever reported this, but here we go. In the middle of the 2016 season, they were in town for the Open Cup, really impressed with Ramirez, and offered just under $500,000 for the leading goal scorer in the NASL. You know, just laughable, honestly. And so you look at it, and it's absolutely there was a perception issue. There was a crisis. You look at players. It's funny you bring up Jeb. He's someone I still talk to incredibly regularly. But then you look at Ben Spies, who used to be homegrown for the Columbus Crew. Danny Cruz, who made MLS Cup with the Houston Dynamo, bounced around to a few teams, and had just left the Philadelphia Union. Bernardo Anior, who had just been with the Crew and with Sporting Kansas City, Damian Lowe, who was seen as a promising center back for the Sounders, brought in on loan. All of these guys came to Minnesota United. Yes, in a big part of it because they hoped they could latch on and make them Major League Soccer side. In the end, only one of them did, and that was Bernardo Anior, who ended up getting injured for the rest of the season. But they didn't get looks afterward. Danny Cruz signed with the Deltas, was sold to Real Monarchs, the USL affiliate of RSL, and now he's coaching there because he couldn't get a look at the top flight again. Ben Spies is in Indy right now. Damian Lowe ended up going to Finland, which I think is incredibly interesting for a 6'3" Jamaican center back. It's a huge perception problem. I think it hurt a tremendous number of players. And I'm, of course, just looking at that Minnesota build because there were so many of those players who, yes, were good enough, in my mind, to make an MLS roster, especially because not every single player is going to be a TAM level, right? And you can only have 8 internationals. You do need those American guys, those Canadian guys who are full of heart and grit, willing to play for, let's say, $100,000 a year, and they're going to give their all every week for the team. Every team needs those guys, right? Yeah. And so it's tough, and I think that Brovsky is a prime example of this, where, the perception of the NASL and the insecurity of MLS at the time led to a lot of players kind of slipping through the cracks.
One other thing that I'm wondering, Jeb, is Jeff. I don't know why I call you Jeb. I have Jeb in my mind. Hi, Jeb, if you're listening. Jabrowski, always a pleasure to talk to you. I remember watching a Super Bowl next to you. Denver Broncos, first time Manning was there. It was a fun time, Jeb. All right, now we're looking at this as a whole, Jeff, NASL, over the last 7 years. Let's put it this way. When it changed the way it was run with USL and NASL in 2011, it was iteration of the NASL that is canceled for 2018. It's that part. So the last 7 years, did NASL benefit the soccer conversation in this continent? Or did the NASL impede soccer growth in this continent?
I would say that it tremendously helped. I think that it kept a lot of MLS teams honest in the eras where salaries weren't. Well, look, I mean, we're only 10 years removed from minimum wage in Major League Soccer being below the poverty line, frankly. There were players being signed for $12,000, $13,000 a year in 2007. We're not that far removed from those eras. So now you have an open market. And how are NASL teams going to be able to get good players? You have to pay better than the cheapest contract that they would feasibly get in Major League Soccer. So then you have these players who are signing the Aaron Pitch-Colins, the Greg Jordans, who are able to now make a living, and they're able to sign in that. That makes the quality of that league better. That also meant the USL had to find a way to keep itself relevant. That meant massive expansion, sometimes detrimentally, and it also meant making a partnership with Major League Soccer. In turn, that made Major League Soccer get a better pathway for their academy players to get minutes and then work themselves into the team. I don't think Raheem Edwards would have been such a no-brainer for Toronto to give crucial minutes during an MLS Cup winning season if it hadn't been for TFC2. So I think that it really is, it's up to the ante for every league. It made the NPSL double down even more on being the grassroots stick to your local team kind of league. Once Peterson came in, the NPSL has seen a bit of a bump and has clearly established itself as the fourth league, if you will, in the pyramid. Now, I guess the third league, but it really was able to kind of grab that lost market space and capitalize on it. So I do think that the NASL did much more good than bad. I think the mere presence of it, the ability for players to earn better wages in this league than another league that's focusing so much on bringing in aging Scandinavians, things like that, I think it certainly did help.
What's the old adage? Nature absorbs a vacuum, right? They say that something's going to fill in if a vacuum opens up. So let me ask you this bluntly. Is there a vacuum, or has the USL now evolved to the point that they're both offering the opportunity for ambitious clubs like Cincinnati to do what they're doing, and also development clubs like TFC2 to do what they're doing? Is there room for something to evolve into this vacuum that the lack of NASL has created?
I think so, Duane. I really do. And I think that I look at it with there are two really strong brands in U.S. soccer that are currently going to be playing in the NPSL as a stopgap. If you're specifically looking at the Cosmos and Miami FC, those are two billionaire TV moguls owning clubs that are going to be playing in what still feels like the fourth division of U.S. soccer. They would be happy to find a league that'll let them pay more, right? So you've got that. Then capitalize on that, and then you say, okay, FC Cincinnati, let's say something magically happens, they don't get an MLS expansion bid. They're not going to want to stick with this USL model, not at all. So then you've got that, and then you move forward, and you've got Sacramento. You know, the point is, USL, because so many of the teams are still developmental, it does mean that wage salaries just in general are lower. I know that FC Cincinnati didn't see a single player earning $100,000 in their inaugural season, and I don't think that changed last year as well. I think it did this year as they're ramping up for MLS. But that means that there's a lot of players who feel like they are worth six figures who would absolutely jump at the chance to join a league like Peter Wilt's proposed NISA, or NISA, I think it's being branded right now. That's a perfectly logical place for if you're looking at 2019. You get the Cosmos in there, you get Miami FC, you get the Armada, you get, let's say, a couple of these more ambitious NPSL sides, and I'm trying to think here. Maybe you can get a San Francisco, maybe you get some of these NASL expansion teams in California who are now kind of on hold. You bring them into the fold as well. You get a couple of USL teams to jump over. Maybe the CPL doesn't quite take off the way that Edmonton hopes or Ottawa hopes. They jump in too. And suddenly, lo and behold, you've got the Dave Downs era of the NASL all over again with Peter Wilt at the helm. And I think that that's a very realistic possibility too, guys, if you're looking at it. So is there a vacuum? Absolutely there is. I think that there is a vacuum. And then look, I think there are a lot of owners who are cutting their chops and really brushing themselves up on learning about the world's game by watching Germany, Spain, England. That's an open system. They don't quite understand the single entity structure of Major League Soccer. They don't think that's the way soccer is supposed to be played. So they're going to buy into something that allows them to spend without a salary cap. So I wouldn't be surprised if NISA kicks off already in 2019, and if it actually does have legs to stand on.
Okay, that's finished. And Kevin's going to move to a Minnesota question, Minnesota United question after this. But I want to ask you one last question. You can't talk about the NASL without talking about the New York Cosmos, and we've already talked about them a few times. We could throw FC Miami in there too, I guess, and you can maybe speak to both of them, and because they sort of stand out. If they're to be part of whatever this vacuum filler is, do they need to change some of their philosophy? Can they continue to operate at the extreme level they are, particularly in FC Miami's case when they're suing people, or do they need to sort of adjust their expectations a little bit?
It's a good question. I think the Cosmos actually had already started to adjust their expectations once Raul retired, once they got shot in the foot by the Nico Kranjčar blowback. I don't know if you remember that. For the spring season, Nico Kranjčar was without contract, and he was working his way to try to sign on. He ended up signing with Rangers in Scotland. But for about 4 months, he was without contract. And so the Cosmos signed him on for a ludicrous salary. I think it was like 10 games, and he was earning about, I want to say it was like $25,000 per game. Just absurd, especially for a player of Nico Kranjčar, who I really don't think he's that much better than what the Cosmos could have gotten domestically. Beside the point, they had to adjust their spending. When they were going through the ownership freeze, when Rocco Commisso came in, there was a big shift, and we're not going to just spend millions and millions of dollars. They lost $30 million over their first 4 years of existence up until 2017. And so then they pivoted. Gio Savarese helped build the academy there. Luckily, that coincided with his academy players being ready to get professional minutes, so he relied on that more. Yes, they still got Emmanuel Ledesma, who was a hell of a pickup and was a younger version of that kind of classic Cosmos signing. But I do think, look, I mean, on the one hand, yes, Miami FC probably needs to adjust it. They can't get away with spending $750,000 transfer fees on 31-year-old defensive midfielders. As much respect as I have for Richie Ryan, that's not a sustainable model. They can't buy Poku off, like they would have to curtail some of that spending. But I think we don't even actually realize just how much wealth Ricardo Silva has, right? And if part of Miami FC joining a league is probably that Silva's in the room to negotiate that league's first TV contract, that's an immense amount of clout, not just in the United States, but looking at Europe as well. So it's weird to say, when there's a few of us who will cover the NASL, or I guess used to cover the NASL for The Guardian once in a while, and we ended up just calling it the bad boys of U.S. soccer, specifically looking at the Cosmos and Miami FC. But I think the bad boys are going to be back in town eventually, and I don't think if they have to fight against LAFC, Atlanta United, Toronto FC, the LA Galaxy, NYC FC, you're going to need to buy some bigger players. I think that's just an inevitable reality of it, especially if you're looking at a couple of billionaire owners. So should they be more fiscally responsible? Yeah, probably. Will they? Of course not. No. I just don't see a way that they don't kind of keep on keeping on and try to buck that trend. And honestly, I applaud them for it, because if you're not going to go into something trying to do the best version of what you can do, you're wasting your time and money.
Owners are going to act like owners, and there's nothing we can do as simple peasant about it. But
amen.
Jeff, want to move to Minnesota for a little while. Second year, we're going into year 2 of Minnesota United. What is your optimistic level? But I just want to mention, by the way, now Jeff is writing for The Athletic, Minnesota. So if you're a subscriber, you can get Jeff's coverage on theathletic.com in the Minnesota region. And I urge you to do so. Athletic is actually providing great content. And this is not a sponsored ad, but I'm gladly plugging your work, Jeff. But Minnesota United, year 2. What is your thought a week away from their first game? Not even.
I appreciate that, first off. And I do believe it's kind of a one subscription across the entire of USA Canada. So if you subscribe from anywhere and you're focusing mostly on your market, I think you'll still be able to peep over and see what I'm up to. That's how much time do we got as far as Minnesota United? Because I think I'm looking at it, and this is a team that just feels incredibly incomplete right now. Not LAFC levels of incomplete where they literally have 18, 20 players on their roster with 4 days to go. But I think that I would be incredibly underwhelmed if I was a fan of the team looking at whatever player acquisitions they made. They cut a lot of chaff in their mind. That's great. There were a lot of players they didn't feel were up to the cut. I think they ended up losing 11 players or so this winter. Good for them. If you look at that roster from 2017, say it's not good enough, absolutely chop the bottom tier up. But you have to build that up, right? And I don't look at the list of acquisitions and see more than maybe one player I personally would confidently start on an MLS team, and that's Matt Lampson. And I don't even think Lampson's going to start. I think it's going to be Bobby Shuttleworth to begin the year again, goal. But I think that Lampson's distribution and reading of crosses is just an upgrade over Shuttleworth while not sacrificing on the shot-stopping ability. I think you're going to see 35-year-old Tyrone Mears get a starting run out at right back this weekend. He was played out of his role by the end of his time in Seattle. He was certainly played out of his role by Anton Walkes, who is a Tottenham loanee who didn't even get his option picked up in Atlanta last year. He delivers a fantastic cross. I think he's a really smart player. I just don't think he's going to be able to keep up with, if you look at some of the left wings in the league, Ignacio Piatti, Hector Villalba, Ezekiel Barco, whatever side he lines up on, Roman Alessandrini. I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with players of that caliber. So that's underwhelming, certainly. Luis Fernando was a fantastic pickup in my mind, the 22-year-old Brazilian midfielder on a loan with a purchase option from Fluminense. He's an absolute motor. I think he actually, from what I've seen of him, highlights I've seen, and I watched a couple games of his at Fluminense, he reminds me a bit of Diego Chara, which is exactly the type of player that Minnesota United was lacking last year. And if Sam Cronin's not going to be able to get back to full fitness yet, He's been out training the last few days. He missed the last 2 preseason games. Yeah, Achara wouldn't hurt in the slightest. So that said, I feel like it's still incomplete. They need to figure out how to get the best players on the field at the time. I fear that they're going to make a mistake and start Michael Boxall over Brent Coleman. I dig into that a lot more tomorrow. Today I put out my first piece for The Athletic, which is an off-field preview and update on the stadium, talking about the culture that the front office is trying to build into itself after missing that for the first year. And then tomorrow is the on-field preview. But I think that there's still probably about 4 pieces that they need to get before May 1st even, just to be able to be competitive. And then I think that the summer window is going to be a big one for them too. So right now I've got them at 9th, maybe 10th in the West. But MLS is a weird league, and who knows, they're probably going to win the Supporter Shield. So
that would surprise me. I'm not going to lie. Okay, Jeff, I'm going to ask you a generic preview question for the overall league in a second, but a couple quick bullet points. First, The Athletic. If it does, in fact, a North American-wide subscription, that is well worth your time. I'm a subscriber to The Athletic. There's a Toronto writer, Sean Fitzgerald, who is, I think, one of the most underrated sports writers in North America that you can read for free there, if you're not for free, for the subscription if you have that. So certainly if you're a fan of Jeff's, check him out. And also, I just realized it's Sam Cronin's 10th season in the league, and I feel really old now. That's depressing.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then you look back, and it's like, oh, yeah, he got a U.S. national team call-up somewhere in there, too. And that feels like forever ago. So, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, anyway, okay, so put the gun to the head. Who do you have to pick to win that MLS Cup Supporter Shield right now, on the eve of the season?
I think Toronto's going to repeat. It's just really tough for me to not see that happening. And look, you got to respect the champ until you see a reason not to. They went out and they got better this year. So, yep, give me Toronto to win it. I think in the West, it's tough, man, because I think I look at it and the 3 best teams in the league right now are in the East. And I think it's NYCFC and actually, I'm not that high on Atlanta this year, and I think it's because it's something that my buddy Matt Doyle has been harping on over at the league site, but they lost Carlos Carmona, who did a lot of that grunt work in the midfield, and they didn't replace him with anyone. And if you're going to try to run a double pivot of Darlington Nagbe and Julian Gressel, that's going to be a wide open freeway for any midfielder with strength to be able to work through your midfield and set up an attack. So I think it's going to be NYCFC is Toronto's biggest threat in the East. In the West, I think it is going to come down again to either Portland, Seattle, or the Galaxy. I love the Galaxy's offseason. I think they did some tremendous work despite the confines of having 3 designated players, none of which you could buy down with allocation money. Bringing in David Bingham, bringing in Ola Kamara, bringing back Perry Kitchen from Europe. Those are fantastic pickups that they're able to do with the salary cap. So let's say Toronto over Portland.
All right.
And am I freezing again? I hope I'm freezing again because I can't afford to
yeah, no, for sure. Toronto's going to be, yes, you'll be freezing.
Jeez, third time in a row, guys. There's other city in North America, There's leave some for others,
All right.
Hey man, King stay the king.
The Athletic, I can't recommend it enough again. And thanks for your time as always, Jeff.
Yep, not a problem. Keep up the good work, guys, and talk to you soon.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. Before we go to BMO Field and recap last night's second leg of the CCL round of 16 between Colorado and Toronto FC. Duane, a big injury yesterday for Montreal, and it's Yep, it doesn't start the season well. One of the biggest acquisitions of the offseason for Montreal was French defender Zakaria Diallo, center back, 6'3", big defenseman that was touted to be one of the starters, maybe next to Cabrera in the central of the defense of the backline. Unfortunately, yesterday he fell. It was the first training outside at the training facility, the Centre Nutrilait, on the artificial outside turf pitch. And Zakaria Diallo ruptured his Achilles tendon. He's out for months. I know. He's out for months. And now the Impact are without one of their biggest acquisition just 5 days, it's Sunday, before their season opener.
There's no hyperbole when I say there could not have been a worse injury for them than that. And Achilles, that could be the season. It really could be.
It could be the career. It's that type of injury. You never know.
Yeah, that's a tough one to overcome. And the Impact, we all know because of the moves they made in the offseason, there was that risk that they lacked a lot of depth in the center back position, and now they're even weaker, right? So it's luckily they got to have someone step up.
Yes, exactly. Luckily, the transfer season for MLS is still open. Luckily, if there's free agents or players that are contracts are done or just available in their league's transfer market's not closed, you need defensemen, and maybe I heard the name of Eric Pinel being circling around, French defender, maybe to take over for Diallo's job, but it's still in the talks right now between the Impact and probably other prospect. It's rumors at this point, but for sure the Impact will try to find a way to bring someone to make sure that, because now you have Rueter and Thomas Meyer-Giguère are basically the other aspect, because Kyle Fisher's done for a long time with tibia fracture, so that's another blow. So you basically have Cabrera, who's still not 100%. So, yep, it's going to be difficult for the backline of Montreal and in the central of the backline to start the season because of injuries.
Yeah, I'm trying to think out loud, like on my feet right now. You might, even with the lack of depth back there, have to look at going 3 at the back or something to try and change things up.
Oh man, who knows? Yeah.
That's a tough one for sure. And the Impact are on, we've said this a few times in the offseason that the Impact have a very challenging season, I think, ahead of themselves. And they're interesting in terms of I tweeted out a few times this season that, following the Impact in the offseason is far more interesting than following TFC, despite the fact I'm in Toronto, because they're trying to do something, whereas TFC is tweaking, right? So that's interesting there.
Like, when you're following TFC now, you're just there. And, oh, a big player comes in. Oh, another big player. Oh, another big player. Feel like Oprah's the GM of Toronto FC, just giving up players to every fans. But when you're in Montreal, like, all right, we got the players we have. Now, stay healthy. Please, stay healthy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, winning solves all in MLS, right? Like, it's because of the nature of what you can offer in terms of salary. I mean, that's, Tim Bezbachenko deserves a lot of credit, but at the same time, it's a hell of a lot easier to approach someone in Europe and go, would you like to come play for TFC? We're the best team in the league right now. We won the championship last year. We're playing in a Champions League. That's the CONCACAF Champions League. They might not exactly understand what that is, but they understand the term.
Champions, yeah.
So, yeah.
And they'd be like, okay, you're paying for my condo downtown with the view to the lake, and you're giving me a very, very VIP treatment anywhere, because MLC owns Toronto, basically, and it's kind of like it's kind of like a secret society, right? So Freemasons, it's kind of like MLSC. If you're MLSC, you jump lines. You don't wait in line when you go to the restaurant. You don't wait in line when you go to the bar. You have your own private bar upstairs at Real Sports. You have a lot of advantages if you're part of MLSC in Toronto.
Well, that's the future, really, of how you get around in a salary cap league, because you can't police stuff like, not to belabor this, but you can't police the idea that you can take a guy that you're going to pay in that mid-range, and you can give him like court-sized tickets for the Raptors, and you get to go back and meet them, and you're hanging out with Drake? And things like that.
Yeah, that might dissuade me, but that's just my personal preference.
Yeah. Well, but it's going to impress someone. It's particularly going to impress the families. Like if they have, their wives or or their siblings or whatever. Like, they can treat them well that way. You can't, the salary cap doesn't cover, buying their parents a nice dinner, right? Like, there's things that you can do when you have money. I understand that, and it makes it a hell of a lot easier for TFC. But at any rate, that's a segue into what we're talking about next anyway.
Yep,
what
CCL.
Particularly,
it was a terrible game. Toronto did not play well, but they didn't need to. So there we go. There was a few injury scare. Josie had a rough 90-minute. Let's just put it this way. A little virus. We don't know if it was a flu or something in his tummy. But Josie had a difficult 90-minute trying to battle that virus. It actually got better later on in the game. But and then his ankle seemed to be a little bit injured. And you had the Bono scare too with the Baji. So it could have been it was a testy affair a little bit.
Nick Hagelin got elbowed in the head.
Yeah. Just weeks before witnessing the birth of his child, getting elbowed in the head is never good.
Yeah, well, look, TFC's got to get used to this. This is what's going to be all year. Colorado did what they had to do yesterday, especially to play in a BMO field. They sat behind the ball for the most part, although they did get something forward. I think when we were previewing it yesterday, I sort of alluded to this. The problem with Colorado isn't necessarily that they can't play solidly. They can't play solidly defensively. So I'm not that shocked that they got a clean sheet. It's that they can't score. They really don't have that killer instinct in front. They only scored. They only came from behind. It was something like it's been like 36 months since they last came from behind by 2 goals or something. Like, they're a crazy stat like that.
So that's like 3 years, right? So that's like 3 years.
Yeah, about 3 seasons. Yeah, it's something they do. They need to. That's where they need to improve, and that's the hardest place to improve, particularly when you've spent a whole lot of money on a guy that, based on his decision to not start him yesterday, is maybe not really number one anymore.
Oh, I kind of like that. I kind of like Hudson, the new coach for Colorado, because, well, you know what? You are wasting a lot of your available resources on one player that might not be that much better than the second option. We've seen Zach McMath last night. He played better than Tim last week. Tim Howard, no offense to Tim Howard, last week, it was early in the preseason of Colorado. It's not at the same level as Toronto should be, or as it is now. They're only a week away from the season. But Zach McMath played amazingly last night. A great few saves, a point-blank one, too, on the free kick. It was a save that he needed to make, but he made it. Last week, there was a few saves in Colorado that Tim Howard needed to make. Didn't make it. Yes, the difficulties of the save he should have done were maybe a little bit higher. But Zach McMath pulled it off last night. Clean sheet against one of the best team ever in North America, and good for her.
Javinko had 2 free kicks that give her, and that point-blank chance, too, that he just blew. So, TFC certainly, they deserve to win the tie. That's not, read too much into no. And that save he made on that weaving sort of free kick that Javinko had in the late, that was about the 70th minute or so. That was probably the toughest he was tested. There was a couple that one that hit the side netting as well. He didn't stop that, but then again, Colorado hit the post. So you look at it that way. All in all, it was, I think, Colorado sort of, even, they didn't want to say it out loud, but they were treating these 2 games as an extension of their preseason. Yeah. They were going to compete because they recognized that they needed to compete for the integrity of the conversation of the competition and for their own sort of dignity. So they weren't going to lie down and die like, say, other teams might do in this competition. So full marks to them, but it's still, I think, going to be a long season in Colorado. I think they need to wait until the summer so they can really gel and maybe finally find. And they might, even with Colorado, it might even have to be an internal league solution to find someone that they can trade a resource for or trade allocation for within the league to get a little bit more consistent scoring there, because it's just going to be the problem. You can't expect, they had a great season, but when you're winning games 1-0 consistently, it's a sample size thing, and it's going to even out over a long form.
Yeah, it is. But with that said, Toronto FC is moving on to the quarterfinals for their second time in their history. Yes, the first time they went to the quarterfinals, it was the beginning of the knockout stage. So it's not necessarily the same stage as it is now, but it is still the quarterfinals of the CONCACAF Champions League, and Toronto made it there. And the one thing I kind of feel it's a bit of a shame, and 2 best teams in North America, if you're looking at the actual champions of the 2 biggest leagues in North America. You got the champions of Liga MX, Tigres, and you got the champions of MLS, Toronto FC, facing each other in the quarterfinals. Shouldn't this be the final? I'm kind of disappointed with the format of the CCL that something like this happens. It would have been maybe a little bit more enjoyable if you wouldn't get one of the biggest teams in your tournament out already in the quarters, no?
Yeah, I don't like the draw. The way that this thing was drawn out did not work out well for the competition. You have the other side of the draw, we'll call it Seattle side of the draw, is not even arguably. It is absolutely weaker across the board. You have the weaker MLS teams and you have the weaker Liga MX teams. Yeah. So there's going to be, that said, any Liga MX team that gets in is going to be could potentially win this competition. Tigres didn't look spectacular in their round of 16 win, but that's understandable with the Mexican teams. They're going to do that. For TFC to have the opportunity to play Tigres, I think this is the first time in probably 18 months that TFC fans are going into a competition, into a playoff or a home and home against a team where most people recognize that they're the underdog. It's a different sort of feeling, and it'll be very interesting to see, especially how they play that leg down in Mexico. There are a lot of people up here that fear that Vanny's one weakness might be a little bit of vanity. That sort of almost rhymes a little bit there, but they might not be willing to bunker down. But then I remember that game they played in Seattle last year when they were missing all but Josie, and they essentially just stuck him up front and decided to play that kind of classic.
That was a Vasquez
game, and
that was a Vasquez show, though. Like, Vasquez dominated that game. I remember him in the midfield literally stopping almost every transition and movement forward from Seattle to stifle and kill the play. And yeah, maybe that's what they need to do in Mexico. Just kill it. Just stifle it. Just suffocate the play.
Well, that's absolutely what they need to do in Mexico. I mean, I don't think TFC can. I think TFC is legitimately the most talented MLS team of all time. And as we talked about last year, that statement is less dramatic than it sounds simply because of the increased money that's come into MLS in the last couple of years. That said, it's still true. There still is more depth, and they've added even more pieces this year. The La Liga, names escape me off the top of my head right now because I have 16 things in my mind, but the fellow that brought in from La Liga, he came on the pitch and was immediately impactful. So this is, what TFC can do at this point.
Yeah. The young defender that Toronto got, not necessarily lucky, but they thought he was going to be an asset down the road this season to become like a good pieces at that point after getting acclimatized to the league. He steps on the pitch and he's already full measure for Toronto. But, Toronto had to build a strong kind of new lineup with roster because it's just a stretch they're on right now. You had the game last night, the game the week before. You have the opening of the season on Saturday versus Columbus. And Wednesday you're playing Tigres. You're playing them the next weekend in MLS. And then you're playing Tigres again in Mexico. So there's a big turnaround.
And if they get by that, it's probably Club America twice more in the next 6 weeks too, right? So that's a lot, and it's especially a lot within MLS. And they've been speaking openly about having reasonable expectations for the start of the season within Major League Soccer. Like they could maybe even lose a couple games on the road early on this year. I think that they might look to lay games, not to play a rotated squad would be the delicate way to put it. On a couple games early because, I think that their experience of last year, they wanted to win everything last year. They still do, obviously, but I think having experienced that, they look at the CCL as more important, certainly than the Supporters' Shield this year. That said, I think they also believe that their talent level will allow them to get rolling through those summer months when teams get tired and teams get beat up a little bit and the depth starts to play a role. And I think TFC believes that they can still compete for the Supporters' Shield, even if they sort of give NYCFC a 5-point lead or a 6-point lead in the spring. I think that they think they can pull them in from that. So it'll be interesting to watch how they approach Saturday, even with the home opener. I think they're going to raise a banner and all that sort of fun stuff and probably give them rings or something.
About that.
So
forgot about that.
Yeah,
tried to forget about it.
If you're going to if you're going to the game, just for our Toronto listeners, the game is 1:00 kickoff, but be in the stands for around noon. They're suggesting because they are, like I said, they're going to raise something up, and they're I don't know if there's rings involved, but this is MLSE, and I think that they've probably had the ring budget. They've been saving that one up for a long time.
You remember the parade? Like, they had everything in that parade. Like, they had gear, merchandise, bottle of champagne, buses, confetti, people on parachutes. You know, a lot of budget were pyro. Like, not a lot of money in that parade. You could tell they were saving since 1967.
It's like, I had pictures of someone, you know, a janitor opening a creepy door up, and there'd be this dusty bookcase, and he would have picked the book off and blown the dust off, and it would have said
parade route
on it. But joke's on everyone else now. Toronto's finally had a parade, but nonetheless, you know, it's going to be tough in CCL. I think Tigres will beat them. I do. I think it'll be closer than Toronto's haters would like, but not as close as Toronto's lovers would like, if that makes sense. Like something like 3-1 over aggregate, with maybe Toronto loses 2-0 in Mexico and nicks a 1-0 at home or something when the Mexicans sort of lay up a little bit. So I think that it'll be closer and it'll be more competitive than we've seen fixtures in the past. But that in turn is going to make the Mexican team, it's going to make Tigres go, well, we can't play guys out with number 200 on the back. We're going to play our regular guys, and that's going to sort of even it out and make it kind of the same result as we've seen in the past. That makes sense?
That does make sense. All right. Fascinating times now, Duane. We got the weekend starting up this season starting up this weekend. It gets a few days to go. Tomorrow, we're probably going to do 2 shows, and we need to talk about this, but I think it's worthy that we make a Soccer Today and a 5 Rings, just because we're 2 days off from the beginning of the season, and we need to kind of preview our team. So Duane and I will look at our predictions. Friday will be our now 4th annual predictions show, and usually we, like last year, Duane predicted all 3 trophies. And, yeah, you should have predicted the lotto numbers, though.
I also got the newcomer of the year right, for the record, just for what that's worth.
That's true.
Yes, we'll do it all again. We'll predict the major trophy winners. We'll predict the 4 trophies. I don't think I got all 4 right last year. I forgot who I picked in the U.S. Open Cup, because I don't know. You're really just throwing darts at that point.
You're pretty much just, all right, throwing something at the wall. It's going to be, really? Colorado? Exactly. So, now, Duane, we'll be back tomorrow. As always, you can listen to the show live Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. on youtube.com/sports podcast and network, and support our show as well, patreon.com/sports podcast network. Thank you to John, who upped his pledge from $5 to $15. Thank you for the spot bonus, Don. It means a lot. Stefan, thank you for donating $5 yesterday. Chris Riley, thank you for your $5 yesterday as well. Do like Chris, Don, and Steven. Help us continue to bring you high quality sports journalism, soccer journalism, independently as well, which is a more rare thing these days, as well as good English, which I don't have. Those are very rare things these days.
Yes, exactly. Well, your English is fine. It's much better than my French. Yeah, and also it helps us with 5 Rings as well. I know our audience for 5 Rings is smaller, but it is every bit as passionate. So certainly we will have, we mentioned the Soccer Today plans, but we'll have our final wrap on the Pyeongchang games on 5 Rings tomorrow. That will be the first one up at 10. Then we'll likely try and keep that to about a half hour in to do Soccer Today after that. On that note, Kevin, as always, I'll let you say goodbye.
You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. You can find every on-demand version of our show at our website, sportspodcastingnetwork.com, or on any podcatchers out there, now available on TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Google Play Store, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, anywhere you get your Deezer, anywhere you get your podcasts, you should be able to find the Sports Podcast Network. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.